We have a story about how people change, and William James spent much of his career arguing that the story is wrong. The story goes like this. First comes understanding. We reflect, we analyze, we gain insight into our patterns and their causes. And then, armed with that understanding, we change. Insight first, action second. This is the logic of the therapy couch, the self-help memoir, the spiritual retreat. And James, who was fascinated by all three, believed it had the sequence exactly backward. The real mechanism of change, he argued in Principles of Psychology and Talks to Teachers, is almost the reverse. Change begins in action. Specifically, it begins in repeated action, behavior that is taken before we feel ready, before we feel different, before any inner transformation has occurred. The feelings follow the behavior. The character follows the habit. The self that we want to become is not revealed by introspection and then enacted. It is constructed through action and then gradually recognized. This sounds counterintuitive, and James knew it. We resist the idea that we should act as if we are already the person we want to be, because it feels like dishonesty, like pretending to be something we are not. But James made a subtle and important distinction. He was not talking about performance or self-deception. He was talking about the neurological reality of how character is formed. The nervous system does not change in response to intention. It changes in response to behavior. If you want to be calmer, you begin by acting calmly, even when you do not feel calm. If you want to be more generous, you begin by acting generously, even when the impulse is not yet there. The feeling, over time, follows the action. His famous formulation on the relationship between emotion and action is relevant here. James argued, in what became known as the James Langer theory of emotion, that we do not tremble because we are afraid because we tremble. We do not weep because we are sad because we weep. The bodily state is not the expression of the emotion. It is, in a significant sense, the emotion. This has direct implications for change. If you want to feel differently, you must begin by acting differently. The body leads, the mind follows. In Varieties of Religious Experience, James documented the most dramatic version of this process, the sudden conversion experience, in which a person's entire orientation toward life shifts in what seems like an instant. These conversions are remarkable precisely because they appear to contradict his gradualist account of change. How can change be sudden when character is built slowly through repeated action? James's answer was careful. The conversion may appear sudden, but it is almost never unprepared. The change has been accumulating below the threshold of consciousness, in subliminal layers of the mind, in half-formed impulses and unexamined longings, until the pressure reaches a breaking point and the whole system shifts at once. The visible moment is the culmination of an invisible process. This means that even in the most dramatic cases of transformation, James's fundamental principle holds. Something was happening before the breakthrough. The person was not simply waiting passively for insight to strike. They were living, suffering, trying, failing, reaching, and all of that activity, even when it seemed to produce nothing, was building the conditions for the change that finally came. James also attended carefully to what we might call the ecology of change, the conditions that make it possible and those that make it impossible. He was not naive about the role of circumstance. A person trying to change while living in conditions that constantly reinforce the behavior they are trying to leave is fighting a structural battle, not just a psychological one. He knew from his own struggle with depression and inertia in his 20s that the will alone is often insufficient. That change sometimes requires a change of environment, of company, of the entire surround in which behavior occurs. But he also believed, with deep conviction, that the margin of freedom is larger than it feels when we are stuck. The sense of being trapped in our patterns, of being unable to change, is itself a psychological state, one that has been reinforced by repetition and that can be altered by the same mechanism through which it was formed. The person who acts differently, even once, has introduced something new into the system. The person who acts differently repeatedly has begun to build a different system. The modern self-help industry has absorbed some of James's insights while distorting others. The language of behavioral change, of habit loops, of acting your way into a new way of thinking, all of this has Jamesian roots. But it has often been stripped of the depth and difficulty that James insisted on. Change is not easy. It requires sustained effort in the face of the pull of old patterns, and it requires tolerating the discomfort of acting in ways that do not yet feel natural. There are no shortcuts in James's psychology. But there is something better than a shortcut, a method that actually works. Act, he would say. Not perfectly, not permanently, not with the full conviction of the person you want to be. Just act. And then act again. The self that emerges from that sustained acting will surprise you. Subscribe to The Psychology of William James to explore more of his timeless ideas.